Want to make something cool and spooky like this? I have a few quick tips for you that will help you get your valley Halloween ready in no time. Best of all, most of these tips aren't just for Halloween. Without further ado, my first tip is, before you do anything at all, stand in the area you want to design and decide what you like about it and what you dislike about it. For example, in the Forgotten Lands, I love the combination between the orange and the purple and the cheerfulness of this pumpkin house. I really like the trees too. They make it feel kind of scary, but in a natural, earthy way. I dislike that there's a pretty uniform darkness throughout and the so-called default path for the Forgotten Lands blends in with the ground, so I can barely tell where I can go or how to get there. Based on what I like, now I know that I need to use orange in this environment and aim for the light, cheery kind of Halloween vibe, and less so the dark monsters and ghosts kind. I also know to keep the natural spooky vibe in terms of the vegetation and trees. And based off what I disliked, I know that I should ignore the go-to pathing for this biome and choose a high contrast path that will stand out and might brighten it up a bit. So basically, my first tip was just to actually kind of stand around a lot. But it really does help. It narrows down the infinite options. Personally, I've already stopped feeling so overwhelmed by the task at hand, and now I'm getting really excited to start picking out paths and furniture. With that in mind, my next tip is to use repeating elements. Don't fall into the trap of thinking every item you place has to be unique. Using repetition can help ensure a consistent feeling and look throughout the area you're working on. For example, I totally fell in love with this candy corn nightlight, and I used dozens of them to illuminate my pathway. I like them a lot, so I think there should be a lot of them. And putting them almost all the way from one entrance to another adds a certain cohesiveness to the area, helping it look like all one thing instead of a bunch of smaller builds pushed together. And that brings me to another point. I really love this scarecrow too, but since he's much bigger than the candy corn lights, I didn't want to put a ton of instances of him anywhere. Instead of repetition, I suggest you take items like this that you love and put them somewhere conspicuous to make them a focal point. I love that you can see this scarecrow immediately as you enter the zone, and his illuminated face really draws in the eye, presenting him like the star he is. Another tip is to use landscaping to make your path edges more interesting or to even make them curvy. I used these ferns and these rocks to hide most of the corners to this path, and I really like the way it turned out. The path seems to wind off into the distance and ultimately disappear into a thick, spooky forest. Another tip is to try to use the non-landscaping plants. For example, I made a side garden for this pumpkin house and I planted some corn. As much as I want to harvest it, cook it, and sell it, I'm going to leave it here to bounce in the wind. I love how tall it is, so you can kind of see it peeking through the fence as you approach. It looks really nice. Boy, that sure was a subscribe-worthy tip I just gave. But if that one didn't convince you to subscribe, maybe this next one will. Here it is. You should definitely make sure you like your design both in daytime and nighttime. This might be as simple as hanging around after dark and adding some street lamps. Or, in my case, choosing green lighting to match the green light from the many small fires throughout the biome. I really like the way this place lights up at night now, and the way the nightlights turned out is definitely sparking joy. This next tip is the most important tip of all. Disregard anyone else's tips if you don't agree with them. Designing your valley is all about making a place you want to be, so don't be afraid to just go where your heart leads. And don't be afraid of copying anything you see around here. I don't see anyone's name on it. Plus, you'll likely find a way to make it look even better and put your own spin on it as you go. Oh, and I have an exclusive Halloween tip for you. Make sure you unlock as many Halloween items as possible before you even start. It'll be way easier that way, and if you want to know how to get them all fast, check out the video on screen now.